They thought Ad.di.s A.ba.ba would be just another summit. Speeches, smiles, the usual masks. But this time something cracked. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't come for diplomacy, he came with proof. And in the heart of the African Union's most sacred hall, he exposed a truth no one wanted to face, that even among us, betrayal grows in silence. A trusted leader had sold access, signed secret deals, and handed Africa's sovereignty to outsiders. Traore didn't shout. He didn't need to. His evidence did the screaming, and when he finished, the room wasn't united, it was shattered. If you believe that even a small nation can stand tall in the face of global powers, if you believe Africa has the right to write her own story in her own words on her own terms, if you've seen the fire in the eyes of Captain Ibrahim Traoré and felt a shift deep within, then this story belongs to you. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, not just to support but to take a side, because what happened in Ad.di.s A.ba.ba wasn't just a moment, it was a warning, a declaration, a spark. The old order is cracking, the silence is breaking, and what began as whispers is now a rising storm. And so with the summit underway, the performance began. Ad.di.s A.ba.ba was dressed for the occasion. Cameras rolled, red carpets unrolled. Leaders smiled for photographs beneath banners that read, African Unity and Security. The African Union headquarters gleamed with polished marble and diplomatic ritual. Abiy Ahmed, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, stood at the center of it all, calm, commanding, and perfectly rehearsed. His opening speech praised regional progress and spoke of our shared future as sovereign nations. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré was watching closely. He didn't smile much. He shook hands, nodded politely, but said very little. To most in the room, he appeared cold, perhaps even distant. But behind that silence he was scanning, reading faces, weighing words, and remembering every line that didn't match the truth he already knew. To the world, this was just another AU summit. But to Captain Ibrahim Traoré, it was a theater of illusions. The same leaders who praised independence had welcomed foreign military trainers. The same voices that warned of neo-colonialism had signed contracts with Western defense companies. Behind their speeches there were shadows, and Abiy Ahmed stood in the center of that shadow, not as a passive observer, but as an orchestrator. Traoré had not come to expose him just yet. Not on day one. First he would listen, he would watch, let them play their part, let them smile into the cameras, because Captain Ibrahim Traoré already knew what was coming. The illusion would not last. And when it cracked, when truth pierced through the polished walls of that conference hall, no speech, no protocol, and no alliance would be strong enough to hold the room together. But behind the smiles and ceremonial applause, the truth was beginning to rot. Weeks before the summit, Captain Ibrahim Traoré had already sensed something was wrong. The attacks near Burkina Faso's eastern border weren't random. Armed groups were growing bolder, weapons more advanced, communication among rebels more coordinated. Someone powerful was helping them, but from the inside, not across the sea. Traoré had seen this pattern before, in Mali, in Niger, in the Sahel's worst days. But this time something else surfaced, whispers of Ethiopian involvement. Not just in silence, but in action. His intelligence officers worked quietly. They intercepted messages, followed supply routes, and traced financial trails. What they found was damning. High-ranking Ethiopian officials had been meeting with Western diplomats in Nairobi and Dubai. The discussions leasing land along Ethiopia's western border to foreign military actors. The offer strategic outposts in exchange for economic aid infrastructure loans, and a promise of international support. It wasn't illegal, but it was betrayal dressed in protocol and partnership. What made it worse was the deception. Ethiopia was still speaking loudly at the AU about African sovereignty, about self-determination. Abiy Ahmed gave interviews condemning Western interference in African security matters. But behind closed doors, his government was inviting those very powers into Africa's heart. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't bring accusations without evidence. Every recording, every document, every flight manifest was verified. He had it all. Yet he didn't move too quickly. He understood what this meant. To accuse Ethiopia, to accuse Abiy Ahmed, would shake the entire foundation of the African Union. But he also knew what silence would cost. So as Ad.di.s A.ba.ba prepared for celebration, Captain Ibrahim Traoré prepared for something else entirely. Not a speech, not a show. A confrontation with the truth, and the man hiding behind it. But as the room tried to process what had just happened, Captain Ibrahim Traoré did not stop. One revelation wasn't enough, because what he had uncovered in Ethiopia was not an isolated betrayal, it was part of something larger, something spreading, something systemic. And now he was going to show the continent just how deep the infection ran. With measured steps, Traoré returned to the microphone. His voice, as always, was low and firm. There was no need for drama. The facts were already explosive. He clicked to the next slide. This time the names weren't blurred. Another African state, then another. Traoré revealed evidence of confidential security memorandums between at least 3 other governments and private European defense firms. All signed within the past year. All negotiated outside the African Union's oversight. All included military access rights, favorable mineral contracts, and diplomatic immunity for foreign operators. The room stiffened. The illusion of continental unity shattered with each document he showed. But Traoré wasn't interested in shaming individuals. He was targeting the system that allowed it all to happen. He turned his attention to the African Union itself, not with hostility, but with clear conviction. This body was built on the dream of liberation, he said. But we have let it become a showroom, a place to perform sovereignty, while selling it behind closed doors. He didn't name every official. He didn't need to. Eyes darted around the room. The silence of some became louder than any speech. Some delegates whispered to aides. Others glanced nervously at journalists. A few quietly left the hall altogether. Abiy Ahmed remained seated, jaw clenched, expression frozen. He didn't speak, perhaps because he knew that defending himself would only expose more. Perhaps because for the first time he realized he was not in control of the room. Traore, by contrast, was completely in control. He raised one final document, an internal AU communication suggesting the organization had knowledge of these deals months earlier, but had chosen not to act. That moment drew a collective gasp. Betrayal wasn't just bilateral, it was institutional. Captain Ibrahim Traoré had done what few dared. He named the game. And worse for his opponents, he named it with receipts. No shouting, no accusations, just proof. And in that moment, the African Union was no longer a sanctuary of power. It became a courtroom, and Traore stood not as a prosecutor, but as a witness, who had brought the evidence the world could no longer ignore. And yet in all the noise, the most powerful image came from silence. As the summit unraveled, as delegates argued, walked out, or simply looked away, Captain Ibrahim Traoré remained exactly where he had started, still composed, hands behind his back. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. His presence alone had shifted the atmosphere in that room. And now he stood as the storm settled, not above it, but at the center of it. That image traveled faster than any headline. Across the continent, social media exploded. Not with memes, not with gossip, but with something far rarer: respect. Images of Traoré at the summit began circulating from phones in Nairobi to cafes in Bamako. People shared them not because he was loud or dramatic, but because he was the opposite. He had said what needed to be said. He had shown what needed to be shown. And he had done it without theatrics. For many Africans, especially the youth, something shifted. They saw in Traoré not just a military officer, not just a president, but a reflection of the leader they wished they had. One who wasn't afraid to stand alone. One who didn't flinch in front of power. One who reminded them that resistance isn't always a weapon. Sometimes it's just the courage to speak when others stay quiet. The African Union tried to recover. A new press statement was issued the following morning. It mentioned disagreements, security concerns, and ongoing dialogue. But the world had already seen what happened. The language of diplomacy couldn't erase the raw truth captured on camera. And what of Abiy Ahmed? He left the summit quietly. No final statement, no press conference. His silence spoke volumes. Traore, on the other hand, flew back to Ouagadougou the next day. No grand victory speech, no celebration. But his arrival was met by thousands. Young people waved homemade signs. Mothers brought their children to catch a glimpse of the man who had stood firm. He hadn't promised them riches. He hadn't declared himself a savior, but he had defended their dignity, and that in a continent long starved of such defiance was more powerful than any political win. Captain Ibrahim Traoré came to Ad.di.s A.ba.ba to speak the truth, but what he left behind was much more dangerous, a symbol, and symbols once born don't die in silence. They live in whispers, in murals and songs. They live in memory, and memory, when shared by millions, becomes a movement. When the summit ended, the cameras were packed away. The journalists moved on to the next headline. The official AU reports returned to their usual tone, cautious, polished, forgettable. But something had shifted. Not in the policies, not in the paperwork, in the people. Across Africa, the image of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, standing alone in Ad.di.s A.ba.ba, refused to fade. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it struck a nerve. Because in that moment, one man reminded a continent of something we're too often told to forget: that dignity cannot be negotiated, that sovereignty is not a speech, and that silence in the face of betrayal is not diplomacy. It is surrender. What Traore exposed wasn't just one deal, one leader, or one betrayal. He exposed the pattern, the quiet agreements, the polite lies, the endless cycle where foreign powers smile on camera while carving Africa behind the scenes, and where too many African leaders go along either through fear, greed, or the belief that nothing will ever change. But Traore did change something, not by winning a war, not by giving a fiery speech, but by showing up unshaken with the truth and daring to speak it in a room designed to avoid it. That is the heart of leadership, not popularity, not protocol, but courage. He didn't ask for applause. He didn't claim moral purity. He simply refused to play along. And for that, he became something more than a president. He became a mirror to every delegate who sat in that room, a mirror to every young African watching the live stream on a cracked phone screen, a mirror to every nation still wondering whether resistance is worth the cost. Because in that moment, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood not just for Burkina Faso. He stood for every nation tired of kneeling, and that kind of courage is contagious. The Ad.di.s A.ba.ba summit will be remembered not for its agenda, but for its fracture, not for what was signed, but for what was revealed. And long after the press releases are forgotten, the memory of that confrontation will remain, not as scandal, but as spark, because history doesn't always begin with revolutions. Sometimes it begins with a refusal, a man standing still while the system around him collapses under the weight of its own deception, and from that stillness a storm begins. If you believe that a small nation can still stand tall against global giants, if you believe Africa deserves to tell her own story not through borrowed voices but through her own, if you saw the fire in the eyes of Captain Ibrahim Traoré and felt the weight of truth behind his silence, then this story belongs to you. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, not just to support, but to stand beside something greater. Because what happened in Ad.di.s A.ba.ba wasn't just a political confrontation, it was a spark, a fault line, a moment of reckoning. And if you're listening closely, you can feel it. The whispers of resistance are no longer whispers. They're rising, and so are we. This isn't just content, it's a storm in motion. And Africa, for once, isn't bracing for it, she's leading it. The story of Captain Ibrahim Traoré's confrontation in Ad.di.s A.ba.ba offers more than just political theater. It delivers a profound and necessary lesson, not only about African leadership, but about courage, truth, and the cost of standing alone. In a continent where power often wears the mask of diplomacy, where betrayal hides behind handshakes and press statements, Traoré's actions pierced through the surface. He did not raise his voice, yet he exposed the quiet violence of complicity. And in doing so, he reminded Africa that real sovereignty cannot exist without real sacrifice. One of the clearest lessons from this story is that betrayal does not always come from beyond our borders. It often grows from within. While many in the African Union speak of unity, Many also negotiate secretly with external powers, trading military access, natural resources, and influence in exchange for political insurance or foreign cash. These deals are rarely made public, yet their consequences shape the lives of millions. What Traore exposed was not one man's mistake, but an entire system of quiet submission. It was a warning to those who pretend to serve Africa while working quietly against her. But the greater lesson lies in how Traore chose to respond. He didn't act with anger or aggression. He didn't use threats or bribes. He used truth. He used evidence. He allowed the facts to speak louder than any speech. This approach matters, because it shows that strength doesn't have to roar. It can stand still. It can be calm. And sometimes calmness in the face of deceit is the loudest sound in the room. Traore's strength came from his refusal to bend, even when surrounded by more powerful leaders with more powerful allies. This story also teaches us about dignity and the power of symbolism. The image of Traore, hands behind his back, standing before a crumbling summit, said more than hours of debate ever could. It showed what moral clarity looks like in a time of confusion. It showed that leadership is not about applause, but about responsibility. People across the continent saw that image and recognized something that had been missing in so many of their own leaders' integrity. That image became a mirror, forcing everyone to look at themselves and ask, when truth stands up, will I? Another important lesson lies in the idea of risk. What Traore did was dangerous. He challenged not just a man, but a web of power, one that stretches across embassies, banks, and boardrooms. Speaking that truth could have isolated him. It could have cost him alliances. It could have endangered his position, perhaps even his life. But he did it anyway. And that courage to speak when it's easier to be quiet to stand, when it's safer to kneel, is precisely what leadership should mean. The story also challenges us, the people, because it's not enough to admire Traore. We must ask ourselves what we tolerate, what we ignore, what we accept in silence because we believe we have no power. Traore's story shows that one voice backed by truth can shake the walls of an entire institution. But it also shows that silence, when shared by many, can protect the very systems that oppress us. In the end, this story is not just about Traore or Ethiopia or even the African Union. It's about the battle for Africa's future. A battle between those who want the continent to rise on its own terms and those who are content to sell it piece by piece for personal gain. It's about the kind of Africa we want to leave behind, one that repeats the cycles of dependence and betrayal, or one that breaks them. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't promise miracles. He didn't come to save anyone. He came to tell the truth. And in doing so, he gave the continent something more powerful than foreign aid or empty reforms. He gave us a reason to believe that dignity, courage, and self-respect are still possible in public life. And that may be the most important lesson of all. The comment section beneath the video quickly transformed into a space of reflection, anger, admiration, and for many a moment of awakening. People from across the continent and the diaspora poured in their thoughts, some with trembling words, others with steel conviction. The first wave came from young Africans who felt for once that they had seen a leader stand up without bending to pressure. One viewer from Ghana wrote, "Captain Ibrahim Traoré has done more with silence than most leaders have done with speeches. I felt proud, and I'm not even from Burkina Faso. He stood not just for his people, but for all of us." Another echoed that sentiment. "We have been starving for dignity. Today he fed us with truth." Many described how the video left them speechless. Some shared how they had never trusted political summits, always filled with pageantry, but rarely substance, and yet this one moment had cracked the illusion. A user from Nairobi said, "That room was full of suits and empty promises, but Traoré brought a presence that couldn't be ignored. That was not politics, that was clarity." Others focused on the symbolism, the quiet posture, the hands behind the back, the refusal to shout. One comment read, "You don't need to scream when you carry truth. You just need to stand still and let the guilty tremble." Another added, "I showed this to my son. I said, that's what it means to stand for something." But not all reactions were purely celebratory. A few voiced concern. A woman from Senegal wrote, "I admire him, but I worry. Leaders like this don't survive long in a world like ours. Will Africa protect him the way he protects Africa?" Others warned of isolation. Now that he's exposed the game, they will try to shut him out or worse. He needs allies, real ones. Some comments turned inward, asking hard questions of their own governments. "Why is my president always silent when it matters?" one viewer asked. "Why do our leaders clap for each other while the continent burns behind them?" It was clear that the story didn't just provoke admiration, it provoked accountability. In the diaspora, the video struck an emotional chord. Africans living abroad expressed both pride and pain. "Watching this from London, I cried," someone wrote, "because it reminded me of what we could have been and what we still might become." Among the most repeated phrases was a simple sentence. He didn't just expose them, he reminded us. It appeared in different languages, different spellings, but the feeling was the same. Traore reminded people of what leadership could look like, if built on courage, not compromise. A few older viewers, who had lived through the betrayals of the post-independence era, wrote with guarded hope. "I've seen so many men rise and fall, but this Traore, something feels different. He doesn't speak to impress, he speaks because he must." In the end, the comment section was not a digital footnote. It became a chorus, a continent speaking back, not always in agreement, but with honesty. And in that raw space of emotion, disagreement, fear, and hope, the real Africa was present, unfiltered, awake. In a world that so often confuses strength with dominance and leadership with control, Ibrahim Traoré chose a different path. He did not rise by force, nor rule through fear. He led through listening. The most powerful lesson from his story is not about geopolitics or legal defiance. It is about a forgotten truth that real leadership begins in the quiet space between two human beings, when one dares to listen without agenda, and the other dares to speak without fear. Traoré reminds us that empathy is not a weakness. It is a discipline. To sit with pain, to ask without judgment, to withhold reaction, and truly absorb what another person is saying, this takes more strength than shouting orders or enforcing laws. In doing so, he redefined what it means to be powerful. He turned silence into a method, listening into a strategy, and compassion into resistance. One of the most profound lessons from his journey is the value of emotional courage. In the political world, vulnerability is often seen as a liability, but Traoré's choice to remain open, to feel the grief of widows, the hope of orphans, the frustration of forgotten farmers, became the very foundation of his strength. He didn't armor himself in cynicism. He didn't use detachment as protection. He chose to walk into the fire of feeling and emerged with a vision that no weapon could destroy. That vision was rooted in memory. Mandela's memory, yes, but also in the living memories of people history had ignored. By carrying their voices into boardrooms and summits, Traoré forced powerful institutions to confront what they had erased. His leadership was not about representing the masses. It was about returning the mic to them. Another vital lesson lies in how he responded to systemic pressure. When accused of undermining national security, he did not react with outrage or defense. He wrote letters, he shared stories, he shifted the battlefield from courtrooms and council halls to the hearts of the people. Where others saw sedition, he saw connection. Where others heard subversion, he heard sorrow. And in choosing to address not the power structure, but the people within it, he began to change it from the inside out. This is a rare kind of leadership, a subversive kind. It refuses the performance of politics and embraces the substance of humanity. Traoré's strategy wasn't to conquer the system. It was to remind it of its forgotten purpose to serve. He also teaches us something powerful about patience. In an age obsessed with immediacy, where leaders are judged by headlines and popularity polls, Traore chose the long road. He wasn't chasing applause or seeking quick wins. He was building something meant to last. And that meant accepting ridicule, delay, and invisibility. But in doing so, he became the embodiment of Mandela's lost letter, a message not designed to impress, but to endure. For those in positions of influence, whether political, educational, or cultural, Traore's story offers a model of radical humility. He invited voices that institutions ignored. He brought a poet and a widow into national strategy. He asked children for insight, not because it made good PR, but because he believed they had something vital to say. This belief that wisdom is everywhere, not just in offices or uniforms, is transformative. Perhaps the most difficult lesson he gives us is this: that justice without listening is violence in disguise. When laws are enforced without understanding, when orders are given without context, when borders are drawn without history, conflict is inevitable. Traore refused that model. He did not just want unity, he wanted unity that could breathe. That meant making space for contradiction, for discomfort, for healing. This is not easy work. It is not glamorous. It does not win quick victories, but it is the only kind of leadership that sustains peace. Because it does not impose order, it nurtures it. His story also challenges us to rethink what makes a legacy. Too often, legacy is measured by monuments.